Ireland is an island. Wrap your head around that before anything else, because it is the whole heartbreak of this story. A country ringed on every side by some of the richest fishing waters in all of Europe, seas so thick with mackerel and herring that a man could stand on the cliffs and watch the water turn silver with them. And in the middle of that, in the 1840s, 1 million people starved to death. So the question asks itself, and it has been asked for nearly 2 centuries. Why did the Irish not simply eat the fish? You will find lazy answers everywhere. That the Irish were too superstitious to fish. That they did not like the taste. That they simply did not know how. Set all of that aside right now, because it is nonsense. And anyone who has ever been truly hungry knows it is nonsense. A starving person does not turn up their nose at food. A starving person eats grass, eats seaweed, eats the bark off a tree. People who will eat grass will absolutely eat a fish. The real answer is not that the Irish would not fish. It is that they were made unable to, deliberately, over decades, by the same hand that let them starve. And once you understand how, you will never hear this question the same way again. Start with a truth that surprises people. The Irish did fish. They always had. Along the whole coast, there were communities who took to the water, part-time fishermen who farmed a scrap of potato ground and went out in small boats to pull in what they could. Fishing was woven into Irish life going back thousands of years, and you can see it in the archaeology, in the Middle Ages, right up into the 1700s and 1800s, when a real fishing trade was beginning to grow along the coasts, with fish being caught, preserved, and carried inland. The knowledge was there, the skill was there, the sea was there. So what was missing? What was missing was an industry. And that word matters more than any other in this story. Catching a fish feeds a family for a day. Feeding a starving nation is a completely different thing. It needs boats by the hundred. It needs harbors, it needs salt and curing houses to stop the catch from rotting, and it needs roads and carts to carry that preserved fish into the inland counties where the dying was worst. That whole machine is what an industry means. And in the 1840s, Ireland did not have it. Not because the Irish could not build it, but because it had been taken from them. And how that was done is the part that turns this from a tragedy into something closer to a crime. So stay with me and subscribe, because this is exactly the kind of history this channel exists to dig up. Ireland once had the beginnings of a real fishing trade, but after the Act of Union, passed in 1800 and taking full effect the year after, Ireland was ruled directly from London, and the British government followed a policy that slowly strangled it. In the 1820s, there had actually been support, money to build harbors, loans to help fishermen buy proper boats. And then, across the 1820s and 30s, it was all pulled away. Deliberately. Because a thriving Irish fishing industry would have competed with the British one, and the whole arrangement of Ireland under London was built so that Ireland served Britain, never the other way around. By the time the potato failed, the fishing trade that might have saved a nation had already been quietly dismantled, years before anyone was hungry. So by 1845, what was left along the Irish coast was small, local, and fragile. Men in tiny boats catching enough to sell in their own village and no more. And then the potato rotted in the ground, and even that fragile fishing began to collapse, for a reason so cruel it is hard to say plainly. When the potato first failed, the Irish did what poor people had always done in a hard year. They pawned what they owned to get through it. And in the fishing villages, that meant the unthinkable. Men carried their nets, their lines, their tackle, and even their boats to the pawn shop, taking a few coins for the tools of their survival, certain that when the crisis passed in a year, they would buy them back. But the crisis did not pass. The blight came again the next year, and the year after that. And so the nets stayed in the pawn shop, and the boats sat rotting against the quay walls, and the fishermen stood on the shore with empty hands, watching a sea full of fish they no longer had any way to catch. At the Claddagh in Galway, by early 1847, every boat was drawn up to the wall, stripped to the bare poles, not a sail or a line remaining, not a single boat at sea. And even the men who still had their boats faced a sea that was trying to kill them. The Irish coast, especially in the west, is one of the most dangerous in Europe. Cliffs, hidden rocks, sudden squalls, and the enormous Atlantic swell rolling in from thousands of miles away. The boat of the western coast was the curragh, a light frame of wood covered in tarred canvas. It rides those swells beautifully, it is fast, and it is a genuinely brilliant piece of design. But it is a small, frail craft, and it was never suited to hauling heavy nets in deep water. There was barely any timber in the west of Ireland to build anything bigger, and the largest boats were tiny. A fisherman often could not go out for weeks at a stretch when the weather turned, and a starving man, weak from hunger, cannot row miles out into a heaving Atlantic and haul a loaded net by hand. The body simply will not do it. Then there was the salt. This is the detail almost no one knows, and it is devastating. Fish rots within a day or two of leaving the water. To move it inland to the starving, it had to be preserved, and that meant salt, or curing houses, or both. But in Galway and Mayo, the very places ringed by the richest herring grounds, the fishermen were too poor to buy the salt to cure a catch. So even on the rare day a good haul came in, there was no way to keep it. It rotted on the shore, a mountain of food, spoiling in the sun, a few miles from people eating weeds, because no one could afford a barrel of salt. Now walk inland, away from the sea entirely, to the rivers and the lakes, because Ireland is full of them, and they ran thick with salmon and trout and eel. Surely, you think, the people could have fed themselves there. And here is the answer that makes people the angriest of all, and it is the piece the story is usually told without. Under British law, the fish in those rivers did not belong to the people who lived beside them. The fishing rights belonged to the landlord. To put a line in that water without permission was poaching, a crime. And a man caught poaching a salmon to feed his starving children could be evicted or transported to a penal colony on the far side of the world. Families lived on the banks of rivers silver with fish and were forbidden by law on pain of ruin from taking a single one. The food was right there. The law stood between the people and it, with the landlord's name on the deed. And it went further even than the rivers, all the way down to the water line. In many places, a family could not even walk to the shore to gather shellfish or seaweed unless they held tenancy on land that actually touched the sea. If you look at old maps of the western coast, you will see the plots of land near the water drawn long and strangely narrow, and that is why. Tenancies were carved into thin ribbons so that as many families as possible could touch the shore and have the right to what the tide left. Those who held no coastal land could be treated as trespassers for the crime of walking down to the sea. Even the edge of the ocean was fenced off by ownership. What one man saw on those cliffs put the whole thing into a single unbearable image, and once you have seen it, you cannot unsee it. Subscribe before I show you, because this is the moment the whole story turns. Stand on the cliffs of Achill Island in the west in 1847. An Englishman named James Hack Tuke, a Quaker who came to Ireland to help the starving, stood on those cliffs and looked down, and what he saw he wrote down, and it has never lost its horror. The bays below him were, in his words, literally filled with shoals of mackerel and herring. The whole surface of the sea was alive with them, and gathered around him on the cliff stood groups of starving people, looking down at that endless supply of food, wholly unable to reach it. One small boat worked the water where there was room and need for hundreds. Food for thousands rolling in the waves below, and the people above them dying, because everything, the boats, the nets, the salt, the industry, the law, had been arranged so that they could not have it. And here is the final turn, the one that tells you this was never really about fish at all. Suppose Ireland had kept its fishing industry. Suppose the boats and the salt and the curing houses had all been there. Would it have saved them? Almost certainly not. Because at the very heart of the famine was a British policy that insisted food be sold to the highest bidder, and throughout these years, while the people starved, Ireland was exporting food. Wheat, oats, barley, butter, cattle, and yes, fish, salmon and oysters and herring, all of it leaving Irish ports for England, some of it under armed guard to stop the starving from seizing it. In the worst year of the hunger, London's great fish market at Billingsgate sold something on the order of 1 billion herrings and hundreds of millions of oysters and other fish, and not one mouthful of it was sent to relieve the dying in Ireland. The sea was not empty. The rivers were not empty. The country itself was not empty of food. It was all simply leaving, sold over the heads of the people who grew it and caught it and needed it to live. So when you hear the question, why did the Irish not just eat fish? You now know it was never a foolish accident of a people who forgot they lived on an island. They knew the sea. They had always known the sea. The fish were there in their millions, close enough to see, close enough to smell on the wind. What stood between the starving and the food was not ignorance. It was a fishing trade deliberately dismantled, gear pawned in desperation, a coast too wild for the frail boats they were left with, no salt to save a catch, rivers locked behind a landlord's law, the shore itself fenced off by ownership, and above it all a government that shipped the island's food away while its people died looking at the water. The blight was an act of nature. Everything that turned it into 1 million graves was the work of men. That is why the Irish call it not the famine, but the Great Hunger. A famine is when there is no food. This was not that. There was food in the fields and food in the rivers and food teeming in the sea on every side. There was simply no food allowed to the people who needed it. And a great many of those people are the reason some of you are alive today, in America, in Canada, in Australia, in Britain, descended from the ones who stood on that shore, survived somehow, and carried the memory of it onto a ship and away. If your family came out of Ireland in those years, this was their world, the sea full of fish and their hands tied. So tell me where your people came from and when they left. The county, the coast, the townland they walked away from. If your family carried down a memory of the hunger, a story of the shore, a name off a ship, say it in the comments. Because those memories are thinning with every year, and this is a place they can be kept. Subscribe to Blame Your Ancestors, because every week we go looking for exactly these people, the ones who survived what should have erased them. The next bloodline is already waiting.